Hi, welcome back. Allison Olson here, meeting with Laura Khoury. We are both adoptive parents. I'm also an adoptee, and we are both children's adoption book authors. So what we decided that we were going to talk on today is that Laura has two beautiful daughters. They're both adopted and they have two very different adoption stories. So how do you raise multiple adoptees with very different adoption stories? So Laura, take it away.
Hello. Yes. Yeah, this is something that I do think about quite often. So my oldest, just kind of a little review, my oldest daughter is adopted from private adoption. And we adopted her right from infancy. She has an open adoptive, an open adoption with her birth family. And so we see them once a year at least, sometimes twice a year. We write letters and send pictures and have, a pretty open relationship, a really great relationship with her birth family. And when we do see them, we're all together, the whole family, and they're very, very kind and loving with both my daughters. If they bring a little present, sometimes they don't bring presents, and I think that sort of stopped when Cecilia got a little bit older. And sometimes they'll bring them both something. And they're very loving with, I think I had shared one time, just a quick little story. We were all together and we were like walking through the pumpkin patch, and Cecilia, it just feels like you're seeing extended family when we get together. And it has been that way since Sophie was born. We were able to see them quite a bit before Sophie was born and kind of build that relationship. And it just, it's hard to even explain it to people who don't have that situation because, but it's truly just feels like extended family. But we're walking through the pumpkin patch and Cecilia was sort of looking up at Sophie's birth great grandmother, and she just sort of slid her hand into her hand, and the great grandmother sort of just looked down at her and just like took her hand, and then they walked together like that. And Cecilia is very, very loving and easy to like snuggle and stuff, but it was just so sweet the way that happened, because it was like Cecilia was sort of looking up like, is this gonna work? And it did. So
That's adorable.
it was. But then Cecilia had come and she was adopted through foster care, and we don't have much information about her birth family. We know her birth mom's name. So I actually learned through Allison that that's truly an open adoption. We do have, I've been like researching it just a little bit more. We do have a very limited amount of medical background that's in Cecilia's chart.
Oh, good.
It's limited.
Yeah.
But that technically is there, but we don't have a relationship at all. And that is, it's challenging. It hasn't really come up a ton yet. There was some confusion with both my girls because Cecilia was in foster care, and she actually had foster parents, a whole foster family that had her the first 2 months of her life. Kind of completely, we weren't involved yet. And then as we became involved, we sort of like had this shared relationship, and Cecilia spent some time in their house and some time in our house. And I think both of my girls have gone through confusion as to if that was the birth family or not, even though they know the words, they know that was the foster family. But occasionally something will come up and I'm like, oh, whichever one of them thinks that that's the birth family. And so, I just try to be really clear. We've also been foster parents, so it's a lived experience.
Yeah.
But it is confusing, and since Sophie has this one situation that's lived, it can feel confusing. And we try to just talk about it and be as open as we can. I haven't had that like discussion where Cecilia fully I think realizes that Sophie has this relationship that she doesn't. But I know that it's coming, and it's something that's there. And it's something that Sophie and I have talked about, my oldest, a few times. And so sometimes, I mean, I think that it's important to like meet your children where they are in terms of any kind of discussion like this, especially a developmental one. And so you can't always predict when those conversations are when they're willing to talk about it and ask you questions. But there's been times when when we can talk about it separately, and I can share more information with Sophie about Cecilia's adoption and how she might feel. We can kind of speculate that a little bit, but it's a challenge, and I wouldn't take either person's, I wouldn't take it away from Sophie. I would never not let Cecilia be a part of going for the birth family visits. But it's definitely a challenge on our part. And it's also interesting because we don't go out places thinking about, adoption is a huge part of our lives too, because we've adopted twice, we've had foster children, we've had situations, my children we got this new like Google, I don't even know what it is, like little device that shows pictures. And so our last foster child, his pictures will come up because sometimes it goes on a rotation and the girls will be like, oh, we miss him. How come we haven't seen him? And we actually haven't been able to see him since the last day that he left, which was a challenge, but that was something that the social workers thought would be better for him not to see us. I don't agree, but now it's been long enough that I don't think he would be affected by it. But anyway, they'll be like asking me questions. When are we going to get to see him? But I often wonder when we're out, because people like to say who looks like who in
always.
Because it's just because it's so ingrained in people that children look like their parents. and to me, we don't look alike because all four of us have our own, and that is something that we do talk about in our family. Like daddy's Lebanese and daddy has darker skin, and, we can just kind of talk about everybody in their own, because we're all our own individuals. And none of us have any of the same genes. But we don't get that question a ton. And I think back to when I was a kid, and we would talk about that because my sister and I, we do look like our parents, but when we were kids, we didn't think that we did. And we were like, because we both had this like really light blonde hair, and my parents both had dark hair, and we wanted to sit behind my mom, and we wanted to look like my mom at one point, and it was like, we would literally fight over who got to sit behind her in the car and who looked like who. And, I don't know, that hasn't really come up a ton except for by outside people. And, my kids don't fight over that right now, even though I know they're both daddy's girls in my family too. So they both would probably really daddy. But yeah, it's a challenge. And it's just something that is in our family, and something that we constantly need to just find ways to work through, and just keep talking about. And, we're just trying to do our best. And I right before we had this conversation, we had the conversation from Allison. And one of the things that you talked about is just listening to different adoptees' perspectives. And I think I mentioned that your adoptee's perspective is the most important in your situation right now, is just to kind of like keep your thumb on what that is, and try to get as much of an idea of where they are and how their language is developing, and to make sure that you can because you can almost, if you really listen to kids, you can hear what their inner voice is saying to them, and I'm always like, Cecilia calls it the little man who lives inside you, but I'm always like, make sure that little little person inside you is nice to you and is saying nice things to you. And if they're not, then come talk to me because the little Cecilia needs to be nice. But you can really get a good idea, especially when they're young and they're still talking to you. You can get a good idea of how they feel about themselves if you just, can listen a little bit. And
I love that. You're such a teacher to like know it and be able to say it in that way. I love it.
Yeah. But yeah, so that's kind of where we are right now with our conversations.
Very cool. Well, thank you for sharing. I really appreciate it.
Yeah. Thanks.
All right.
All
Bye,
right.
Laura.
Bye-bye.